Good morning, sir. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good morning to you, Keaton, and good morning to your viewers on the content capital WESN, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, Mr. George, let me ask you, the theme for the budget, building capacity for diversification and growth. What were your interpretations from the theme versus the presentation?
Well, the thing is, when one looks at it, you see that there's the usual lip service being paid to the idea of diversifying the economy. But at the end of the day, it always segues back to the reliance upon the oil and gas. In fact, the minister explained that, the long-term projection was for increased production in the oil and gas sector. So it clearly shows that, there is that continued reliance on this as the bedrock of the economy. You look at the, provisions in relation to agriculture, where the tax concessions are offered. But we have said that there needs to be more than that. In other words, if we are talking a strong, resilient, and lasting agricultural reform and agrarian reform in Trinidad and Tobago, it has to be government-led. In other words, you can't simply rely on the individual small farmers who have to face, the constant challenges of predial larceny, flooding, pestilence, dealing with, so many other challenges in terms of getting their crops grown and getting them to market. You need to have an holistic approach to it. So in other words, the government some time ago had spoken about, creating these mega farms. We've seen nothing really to effect that. But I think that's the way we really would have to go if we are serious about reviving the agricultural sector. Agriculture internationally has evolved way beyond, a backyard garden. If you want to look at it that way, you have to have basically the mega farms, and you have to have the technology, you have to have the equipment, you have to have the labor force, so I have suggested, and as a chamber, we of the Tobago Business Chamber have suggested that, look, hey, expand the CPEP and URP programs to ensure that they are now full-time programs, full-day programs. So in other words, workers are working an 8-to-4 job, and you have them now as your seed labor for the agricultural sector. But it has to be an overall holistic plan that is led by the government. It cannot be that you're simply saying, well, tax incentives if you want to do agriculture. I don't see that as having any impact on our food import bill, which we always complain about as a drain on our foreign exchange, reserves. But yet still, you are not really taking the steps to lead that charge for that agricultural reform.
With that said, Mr. George, why do you suppose such steps are not being taken even though a lot has been touted about diversification? Is it a lack of intelligent thinking? Is it a lack of political will? What is it?
Well, part of it is that, you see, measures such as this would be really long-term measures, medium to long-term measures. So in other words, you're not going to see the results, you're not going to get it done within a 2-year window. And, the problem with our politicians is they only look towards the next election cycle. And the next election cycle is 2 years away. So they only want things that can appear to appease the public for that, short period until elections. That's how we function in Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, we have governments who simply, they get into office and their intention is just really to look at how they can ride out the 5 years until the next election cycle and then hope to retain governance again. And that's how it goes. Instead of anyone taking the option and biting the bullet and saying, hey, listen, I'm going to be in this for the long haul. I'm going to really sit down and try to put in place plans for the long term, which I may not see the benefit of, but the country will. But the thing is, nobody really wants to do that. Nobody wants to put, country before self or country before party. They simply look towards the political survival from term to term.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that sense, let's shift across primarily to Tobago. $260 million for its development plans. The Minister of Finance said, in principle, he agreed with the policies presented by the Chief Secretary back in June of his 4.5 billion budget presentation, and he wishes them well. Well, $260 million. Is that enough of a good wish, good luck to you suggestion?
Well, I mean, it clearly is woefully inadequate if it is that one is talking development. But you see, I mean, while we can complain and say, well, the central government hasn't allocated enough, I have always advocated that the THA of itself needs to look inward and try to manage its expenditure, because every year in its budgetary presentation, you have a scenario where basically about 88% of its expenses go towards recurrent expenses. Right, 88% of its budgetary allocation goes towards recurrent expenses. So you're talking paying wages, salaries, you're talking rental of buildings, rentals of cars, rentals of vehicles, equipment, that kind of thing. That's where the money goes. And if it is that you are spending 88% of your budget that way, then you really never ever have enough to do proper developmental or infrastructural works. So they need to look at reducing that bill, reducing that expenditure to see where they can now actually try to save some money to have some leftover for development expenditure. Now, of course, as I say, the government's allocation can be increased and ought to be increased, because really and truly the 260 million we all know is inadequate. But in addition to this, you see, some of the ideas that we've heard from the THA, they are very nice sounding and very airy-fairy, but you hardly ever see them deviling down into the details to crunch the hard numbers to show a proper developmental plan, which has been backed by your architectural, drawing, your engineering surveys, your environmental impact assessments, because these are the things that really matter at the end of the day. Because look at the scenario that occurred some months ago, where they were just simply trying to develop some roads and they hadn't gotten the permission from EMA, and the EMA basically pulled the plug on it and said, hey, you need to get approvals from us. So I mean, they need to understand that, look, it's not just a question of creating a nice drawing on your computer or, a nice 3D rendering and saying, oh, look, we're going to build a beautiful city of Scarborough, a beautiful city of Roxborough, as you saw Mr. Duke come out some time ago with, some, fantastic futuristic looking drawings that, look like a mini Dubai. Of course, yes, it's nice in fantasy and in theory, but in reality, you have to think in terms of, okay, how do we actually achieve this? And there's a lot of hard background work that needs to be done before you can come up with a realistic and sustainable plan.
That's most interesting that you've suggested that. So then you tend to wonder then if this is perhaps a move that very much puts the THA in a position that now has to speak further as to what you've just elaborated upon. And does that also include the THA also have to looking at alternative avenues to fund its development programs?
Well, of course, that's something that they would have to definitely look at. But, the reality is that in terms of being able to borrow on international capital markets, the problem is that the THA as an entity is very constrained and restricted in that regard. So therefore, they will have to be creative. And we have suggested ways that actually the central government can facilitate this process and make it a lot easier. One of the things we've suggested as a starting point is the immediate and unconditional repeal of the Foreign Investment Act. This act, which was proclaimed some years ago, is one which actually crippled all direct foreign investment into Tobago. You had a scenario where there were lots of persons who were willing to, put up massive projects in Tobago. But the thing is, with the coming of that legislation, it really put everything to a halt, everything ground to a halt. So therefore, we have asked the government to repeal that legislation, And it's something that actually is going to be of benefit both to Trinidad and to Tobago, because we keep complaining as a nation that there's a foreign exchange shortage. And yet still you have legislation that is a direct block and bar and impediment to direct foreign exchange investment. Why would you want to keep that on your books when all the other islands, Dominica, Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, they are actually rolling out the red carpet to foreign investors and making it easier and facilitating direct foreign investment?
Well, the government is going to make an argument, as has already been made, that we are still spending a lot through our ministries, through of course national ministries and 6 scheduled items. Is that enough that the government is doing on their part, the national government that is?
Well, I mean, of course, those 6 scheduled items are the responsibility of central government, and I mean, there's no escaping that. And those things, of course, do also redound to the benefit of Tobago and Tobagonians. So therefore, that's understood. But the areas under the 5th schedule of the THA Act for which the THA has responsibility, those are the areas where the THA would need to see how it can increase its access to funding. Because, as I say, if you have so much of your budgetary allocation going simply to recurrent expenditure, then it really leaves you very little wiggle room in terms of any infrastructural development.
So let's expand on that for a moment, because I like the argument that you've made in regards to foreign exchange and all the constraints related to foreign exchange right now. The Minister of Finance made an argument that Tobago has a key role to play in the resurgence of culture, agriculture, etc. He listed a few others. But in that sense, does Tobago understand, or do Tobagonians understand what they can offer or what they have to offer besides a tourist product?
The thing is, you see, I think that comes with a question of vision. The Bible says, a people without a vision shall surely perish. And you sometimes wonder if the leaders in Tobago, if the leaders in the THA really understand or really have that type of vision. You see, we have to recognize and realize that we are in a vastly and rapidly changing world, one that is evolving all the time. And I have suggested, and as a chamber, we've also suggested that, one of the ways that Tobago can join the revolution, the digital revolution, is by, first of all, making free internet access available throughout the entire island. Tobago is a small island. That cannot be impossible for the THA to arrange. Let the young people get to be able to explore their creativity, let them be able to explore their entrepreneurial side. There are actually some Tobagonians who are already making local products and selling on Amazon, So the point is, get them access, get them the tools, get them the materials, get them the, resources to be able to, go into new areas. Let them be able to explore things that we, may not have thought of. And that's the way you are going to get that kind of resurgence and resilience built into your economy. Because once you have the micro entrepreneurs, learning and growing and building their businesses, then of course that will also contribute to your economy in Tobago. So we have to think outside the box. We have to think past the traditional areas, and think past even the traditional careers that, we would have, taught our children to say, well, you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. I mean, the world is spinning way too fast for that. We have to think in terms of, like digital content creators. Look, we have from Tobago, the famous actor, Mr. Duke, who starred in the Black Panther movies, so therefore maybe we need to look at creating, some sort of a movie industry or something. There are so many ways, but you see, you have to have that vision, and that vision has to come from the top. When you think of Singapore and how Lee Kuan Yew was able to transform, Singapore was a poor, indigent, it was a disaster when he took over, and he said, listen, we are going to transform this place. You know, I mean, he put some hard and harsh measures in place, and the population at first were not in favor of it because they called him a dictator, all kinds of things. But eventually, when they began to see the progress and see the results, they embraced it and embraced him, and he's been hailed as the hero and, you know, the father of Singapore, so to speak, because he is the one who revolutionized and changed that country. And remember, Singapore is a very small country. You know, Singapore is about quarter the size of Trinidad, but yet still Singapore is the fourth largest financial center in the world. You know, they are a major player on the world stage. And let me tell you this, they have almost no natural resources, but yet still they were able to, you know, do so much with so little. It reminds you again of the story in the Bible of the man who gave his servants the talents. You know, he gave one servant 10 talents. That servant, he just buried it. And, you know, after several years, he came back and he gave the master, he said, well, you gave me 10, look, I give you back 10. But then the servant who he gave one talent, that servant took that little bit and he leveraged it, he worked it, he multiplied it, he reinvested. And then he was able to now produce much more than the one talent that he was given. So at the end of the time, the master said, well, you are somebody I could work with, because at the end of the day, you took the little that I gave you and you made a lot out of it. And that's what we have to start doing in Trinidad and Tobago as a whole, and in Tobago in particular.
You think that Trinbagonians have the patience, Mr. George?
Well, you see, let me tell you, it's something that has to be led from the top, and the government has to show that kind of maturity and leadership, and that's self-sacrifice, because it is going to be self-sacrifice. If you think back to when the NAR was in power, they basically took the decision to sacrifice themselves, because that's what it was, because they said, listen, there are some hard decisions that need to be taken, some steps that are not going to be palatable, but we need to take it to save the nation. And that's what is needed at this time in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not sure, when one looks around at the political landscape, you see too many players who seem willing to, you know, make that type of sacrifice. In fact, most of our politicians appear to be seeking self-interest and be self-serving rather than be willing to, you know, make that self-sacrifice. So that's the challenge we have in Trinidad and Tobago. But unless we get that direction and that leadership and that willingness to bite the bullet and say, hey, listen, Trinidad and Tobago, this is our 5-year, our 10-year, our 15-year, our 20-year plan, and we are sticking to this, we are staying the course, we are going to change. Because change is not going to come overnight. You know, even you talk about the crime situation and, you know, how everybody feels depressed about that. That can change. I never lose hope, you know, Keaton. I always remain optimistic, because Trinidad and Tobago has so much potential. You see, when you travel all over the world and you look at other countries, you recognize that, hey, listen, our problems are not insurmountable, you know. It's just a lack of proper political will and a lack of our leaders having that gumption and the testicular fortitude to say, hey, listen, I want to make this a positive change, and regardless of what it's going to do to my political career or whatever, I'm going to do this for the nation. Nobody wants to put country before self or country before political party. They all want to toe the line to look for benefits and whatever favors they can get. And that's the real challenge we face in Trinidad and Tobago on a daily basis.
Well, Mr. George, before we bid farewell this morning, and thank you very much for your time, in that sense as well, the allocation, the budgetary allocation for Tobago, what does it suggest of Tobago's position in the national conversation in regards to the Twin Island Republic? Because it's on the lower end of the Dispute Resolution Commission's its suggestions from 2001. But in that sense, how does it reflect upon the position of Tobago in national development?
Well, the thing is, you know, I think that what Tobagonians need to understand and recognize from this is that, look, hey, you have to start looking for ways to wean yourself off of the financial umbilical cord that has you tied to the central government. In other words, yes, the Dispute Resolution Commission has allocated that, yes, you must get a certain percentage of the national budget. But apart from that, try to find your own ways of generating your finances, generating your income. So therefore, in other words, what the central government gives you is now going to be a bonus on top of what you can earn or generate for yourself, rather than it being a scenario where every year you come stretching a begging bowl to central government and, like Oliver Twist from the William Shakespeare play, you're asking, sir, can I have a bit more, please?
Mr. George, thank you very much for your time this morning, sir. Wishing you all the very best and looking forward to the next conversation.
It's always a pleasure. And, I always say, Kitan, that, shows like this, I am always willing to make the time, because I think by you and I having this type of discussion and discourse, we help to elevate the level of conversation in the nation. Because, of course, we're a nation of humor, rumor, and old talk and bacchanal. But sometimes there are serious issues that need mature, sober discussion and reflection. And if this is our contribution to nation building, I'm always happy to be part of it. Thank you.
I can only salute that, sir. Thank you very much once more. All the best to you.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful morning.
You too, sir. Have a great day. Mr. Martin George, the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber.